Good morning, thank you. We're on day 2 of our budget hearings. And first I'd like to ask if there's any public comment.
Anybody on Zoom, Dale?
No.
Seeing nor hearing any public comment, we'll move to our next item. And so our public hearing on Klamath County Drainage Service District budget. Thank you so much.
I'd like to go ahead and read a short budget message. Members of the Budget Committee, Board of Commissioners, and citizens of Klamath County, I am pleased to present the annual balanced proposed budget for year ending June 30, 24. The proposed budget Klamath County Drainage Service District is $2,950,000 compared to the adopted budget for fiscal year 22-23 of $3 million. The proposed budget for fiscal year 23-24 continues on the principles adopted in fiscal year 23. The Klamath County Drainage Service District presents a balanced budget as required by ORS 294-331. A balanced budget means revenue and expenses match, but does not mean that current operating revenues match current operating expenditures. The majority of the revenue is cash carryover from 23 fiscal year, which are dedicated dollars earmarked for system improvements generated from prior year assessments. The district's current assessment rate is $24 per tax lot per year. The estimated fiscal year 23-24 revenue is $190,000. The district has committed funds for a master plan study to find system capacity, investigate fee title transfer from U.S. Bureau of Reclamation to Klamath County, identify future piping projects, identify future pipe replacements, and identify costs if O&M is expected to meet federal levels. The anticipated cost of the study is $300,000. District has an approved water quality implementation plan. The district has an approved water quality implementation plan to address the total maximum daily load decisions by the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. Klamath County Drainage Service District's contract with the Bureau of Reclamation, signed in 1995 for maintenance of the 1C drain, expired in 2020. However, a 2-year extension was signed in order to allow the Bureau time to create a new agreement with revisions. As of this writing, the revision is still pending. If the revision includes the county assuming ownership and the county agrees, future budgets would require additional capital and maintenance costs. Modification could lead to an increase in drainage revenues as staff and equipment is needed year-round. In early 22, the BOCC approved Public Works to continue to maintain the system status quo to keep water flowing. This approval was agreed to by U.S. Bureau of Reclamation and Klamath Irrigation District. The district has committed funds for the master plan study in this budget, and other major expenditures are reimbursement to the Enterprise Irrigation District and the Road Department for annual maintenance. Enterprise Irrigation is subcontracted to maintain north of the A Canal for $51,500 annually. If the irrigation year is cut short, we have budgeted to hire KID and to use Road Department employees to muck out ditches and install pipe. The Budget Committee hearing on this proposed budget is being held today. During the presentation and review, there will be scheduled opportunities for public input. Budget deliberations are scheduled for today. All Budget Committee meetings are open to the public, and public comment is always welcome. Included with this material is an overview of the district's significant accomplishments in the prior year, as well as information on the program. The budget reflects a statement of purpose, mandated services, self-imposed services, measures of effectiveness, and significant issues facing the district. Additionally, financial information is included. As the Budget Committee reviews this budget with the managing agent, he can elaborate on services that will be provided to the community with the budgeted funds. The budget is appropriated by expense category, not individual line items. After the Budget Committee reviews and makes the desired changes to the budget, it will approve the budget. The approved budget will be published for final public hearing on Tuesday, June 12th, 23, where the Board of Directors will meet in a public session to adopt the budget. The Board of Directors are authorized to amend expenditures in the Budget Committee's approved budget up to 10% of any fund without reconvening the Budget Committee. The Board of Directors always encourages public input. We would like to acknowledge the efforts of the managing agent and the program managers that participated to complete this proposed budget. We would like to extend our personal thanks to the citizen members of the Budget Committee for their time, concern, and insights related to this district. We also wish to acknowledge the Board of Directors' support and leadership.
Good morning. The Drainage Service District, it's fairly straightforward. We thank you, Vicki, for that overview. Hit a lot of the high-level bullet items. We don't have any equipment or resources that are directly associated with the Drainage Service District. Public Works supplies the labor and equipment as needed to keep, this is the major 1C system. It's not the minor ditches around people's houses, so we occasionally have to muck out those ditches, and we occasionally have to replace pipes. And we are in the middle of our master plan this year, and that spanned last fall. We did data collection, and now that master plan, which was previously done in 1982, which is 41 years old, is quite a bit outdated. And a lot of developments occurred since then that takes up capacity of the drain system, and we have this master plan and model going on to tell us where and when we apply a 25-year or a 50-year storm event to this system, where the problems are going to occur. In addition, it's just an inventory of thousands of culverts, and those culverts are typically metal and they have a finite life, and we're doing inspections on those culverts to see which ones we need to replace so that we can proactively do that instead of reactively when one of those collapses and causes a major issue. So we're trying to get boots and eyes on it before it becomes a problem. It is in a state of limbo. The Bureau has known for, the contract actually expired in 2020, May of 2020, and here we are almost in May of 23. And we had asked for a 2-year extension. They granted that. Then at the end of the 2-year extension, they figured out that the extension wasn't valid because the original contract had already expired and they didn't write an amendment within the time. That's when we went to the Board of Commissioners. Our citizens are still paying the $2 a month. We feel like we should still provide that service. If we take a hands-off approach, then it becomes a KID and a U.S. Bureau issue, and that's just passing the buck to them. While we're collecting the funds, they're responsible for it. So the commissioners did make a decision to protect our citizens inside the Drainage Service District and continue status quo. We're not excited to invest a lot of capital money at this time into that until we know the status of whether we are going to transfer the district or enter into another long-term maintenance agreement. If we do enter into that agreement, if they bring it to 2023 federal standards, then there may be a cost associated with having to procure equipment and workforce directly for the Drainage Service District if the expectations are to perform maintenance at a higher level than we have in the past. And one of the examples I use for that is vegetation management. There's 20 miles of ditches in the urban environment, and it's a variety of dedicated right-of-way and easements on private property. And we get quite a few calls on mowing the ditch banks, and we've never done that, and that typically isn't a function of keeping water flowing. So, but if the Bureau puts that on us, then that's an example of we would need a vegetation management crew for from April till September to mitigate that, which comes at a cost. And we, at $2 a tax lot times per month is $24 a year. We have in the door about $220,000 a year, and you could see if we had a crew that was maintaining that system proactively for vegetation management, that could exceed that amount, so we would have to adjust our rates. So for the time being, it's keep the water flowing And again, this is for the 1C backbone system. It's not for the private ditches leading away from that system. Any questions?
I don't believe there are any questions or discussion on it.
Great. So I think administratively, close the hearing.
We need to keep it open, and if there's no changes, then we can go ahead and approve
Okay,
district.
so do we take a vote then?
Yes.
Okay.
Vote, and then there's paperwork. Oh,
Do we have a motion to take a vote?
I move that we approve the budget as presented.
Second.
And then we need to do this one first.
First, okay.
So then, would it be best then to read the resolution since we have a second on the motion?
You can read the resolution or the agenda item summary, whichever, or both. They both are a little repetitive, so. whatever.
Okay.
Share the group. Just point of order, after the second, is it appropriate for public comment during that period before the vote?
Not necessarily public comment, but discussion from the board.
Do we have any discussion? So the motion, whereas the Klamath County Drainage Service District budget for fiscal year 23-24 has been prepared as prescribed by law, and whereas public hearings were advertised and held on the 18th of April 2023, and therefore be it resolved that the Budget Committee of the Klamath County Drainage Service District hereby approves the budget proposed by the budget officer and the total sum of $2,950,000 as contained in the budget document on file in the Office of County Commissioners. And take a vote, so all, do we vote individually or do we just vote all? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I'm sorry? Chair votes aye, the motion passes.
So, Madam Chair, just point of order, when we get to the weed control, when we're done with the presentation, we do need to open it up for public comment before we make a motion to approve that budget.
Okay, thank you. Okay. And then should pass this around for signature?
Yep.
And then do we adjourn this budget hearing? So the public hearing on the Klamath County Drainage Service District budget is adjourned.
We'll reopen the county budget.
So we will reopen the Klamath County budget hearing.
Mhm.
So Public
Great.
Works.
Thanks. Did you have an overview of weed, or do you want me to?
No, I
Provide
don't.
that. Okay,
Just
the
budget
districts.
messages on that.
Sounds good. Great. I believe next up is weed control. And this is a 100% contract-driven contract. We do have seasonal noxious weed control from around the end of April to October. Each year we identify an A list of an A, a B, and a C list of noxious weeds in our county. We enforce on the A and B list, and each year the weed control board makes that recommendation to the Klamath County Board of Commissioners, and then the Board of Commissioners actually adopts the annual weed control district. Challenges for this year are our workforce, to have a full contract spraying. Each year we have 3 applicator teams, and that includes the applicator and the driver. And then we have Todd as the supervisor of all of that. The last few years, we've only had 2 applicators, so roughly a complete season with 3 applicators would be $300,000. We've been completing about $200,000 of that contract work. This year, we anticipate major expenses. Every few years, we have to, let's call it 5 years or so, we have to, the noxious weeds can build up a chemical tolerance to the chemicals that we've chosen. And one such tolerance, we've used diuron in the past, and we noticed Russian thistle and kochia coming through the last year from that spray treatment. And this year we are replacing that with Esplanade. That comes at a chemical cost increase, so it's about $30,000 a year. But we feel it's necessary to prevent those breakthrough weeds that build up resistance over the years. We also have 1 pickup truck in the budget. It's budgeted at 50% weed control and 50% public works. Todd works for public works from October through April. He snow plows and performs inventories for us for the culverts. Like in the drainage service district, we have a GPS, and we have thousands and thousands of culverts, and he's part of the inspection team on those. So, any questions on weed control?
Jeremy, and the tolerance to chemicals, is that something you're always chasing? So Russian, whatever, I forget the term, forgive me, you went out and you bought a product that'll take care of that this year. Is it likely that 5 or 10 years down the road, Russian, whatever it is, will be tolerant to that and we'll have to buy a even more expensive chemical, or?
No, we typically switch back. So so I've been here 6 years. This is the first time that we've switched chemicals. I noticed Russian thistle and kochia growing at the road shop, which should be the closest place to home base. We should not have an issue. And we saw this breakthrough going through last fall, and I talked to Todd about it. And so that's when we knew that this year we had to switch. Typically we switch back. However, diuron is becoming tougher and tougher to get, and it has a higher spray application rate. And so the industry is moving away from it. I think in this case that we'll use Esplanade for a while, 4 or 5 years, which would come at an expense. And at the end of all of that, a crystal ball says we would be switching to something else. We don't know if it's higher cost or lower cost at this time. So yes, the industry switches, and weeds do what they do best, and they become chemically intolerant or chemically tolerant to these chemicals that we spray over time. So yes, I think that we're going to see increase in cost. In this case, I can't promise that we're going to go back to diuron because the manufacturer is supplying it in, my understanding from talking to Todd this morning was they're not complying with our request to deliver it in certain size containers, and then it becomes a headache for us to process this in smaller and smaller containers because you get thousands and thousands of containers. And so we most likely aren't going back to diuron, but we will be on the lookout because we don't like the chemical cost increase. We were just painted into a corner that that's what was available this year.
Let me ask you, I hope it's not a silly question, a fundamental, why do we bother? I don't, today's weed is tomorrow's chrysanthemum.
Possibly. So Klamath County Public Works, I'll speak to that. And some history on the weed control district. It was the first one founded in the state of Oregon back in the 20s because it is highly important. Roads tend to be a mechanism for weeds to travel from other areas and get established in a road, and then it becomes that noxious weed enters onto private property because of that transport mechanism for roads. And so we have a weed mapper. It's a state weed mapper, and in 2017 we put tens of thousands of dots on a map, and you can start seeing the roads stand out. And so we take a proactive stance on treating the roads the best we can. We spray the shoulders, the 4-foot shoulder. So we have 860 miles of roads, 2 shoulders. So there's north of 1,700 miles of shoulders in the county. That's a safety issue if weeds start growing on the 4-foot shoulder for somebody pulling out from a driveway. So we automatically spray most shoulders. We have a relationship with the Forest Service where a county road goes through a Forest Service, and we may not spray those sections if they're sensitive. We have organic farms that we have a no spray. People can sign up to put no spray zones, and then they're responsible for the weeds along their frontage in that no spray zone. And but it's kind of keeping up the good fight. If you think of it that way, and if we didn't do it, there would be a much greater burden on the 6,000 square miles of property inside of Klamath County that's publicly and privately owned. So we try to do our part and be a good neighbor, and that's what this program's for. And it's 100% contract driven, so there isn't any tax funding mechanism to drive this. It's the Forest Service hires us to spray on the Forest Service. This program goes beyond roads, but from a public works standpoint, we are good neighbors and treat our roads. And then we have a dozen or so contracts with state and federal agencies to spray these vast tracts of lands. And if you think the county's 3,000 square miles of publicly owned property and 3,000 square miles of privately owned property, it's a big county, and everybody's trying to be good neighbors so that we don't have these outbreaks. And a good example when I was growing up down near Malin was star thistle. I remember my dad saying on her property that that's star thistle, and it came up from California. And if you've ever seen star thistle, it actually causes if a cow or a goat eats it, it actually can get lodged in their throat and kill the animal. And that's just one example. But on the A list, there's hemlock, which grows along waterways and is highly poisonous to animals. And if we allow that to get out of control, then it becomes a burden on the private property also.
Thank you.
Do any other questions or items for weed control? On to bicycle trails.
Yeah, just to follow up on weed control, I know the commissioners have heard this. This program does not blanket spray. When we see a noxious weed, it is a spot spray, kind of like your yard. You wouldn't blanket spray your yard for a couple of dandelions. You'd target the dandelions. Well, that's what we do on the greater system. There's a misnomer out there that we blanket spray the world, and even using helicopters and everything else, and that's absolutely not true. We use backpack sprayers and target just the noxious weed that's on the A or B list. Okay, bike trails. As a part of the vehicle tax, which is a combination of registration and gas tax, 1% of our revenue that comes in via that mechanism through the state of Oregon is identified to be used on bike and ped trails, or bike and pedestrian improvements. So we receive somewhere around $7 million to $7.5 million of gas tax and registration fees. So we see about $75,000 of revenue that gets put into this category. The Road Advisory Committee is a committee that hangs out underneath the Board of Commissioners and meets a couple of times a year. A few years ago, I went to that committee and said, do we want to save this $75,000 up to get more bang for a buck, such as the Foothills Bike Path was paid for by this in 2012, 2013, and that was a $600,000 or $700,000 project, so we saved it up for that. If we use it towards a bunch of one-off projects every year at $75,000, we're paying prevailing wage, we're mobilizing contractors multiple times in order to get small projects. So a lot of the project is chewed up in design costs and administrative costs and inspection costs, so you don't get a lot of mileage out of those funds. So the Road Advisory Committee a couple of years ago recommended to save this up and use it for some larger projects. The projects that we have in the hopper, the short-term project is the roundabout out at Homedale and Southside Bypass was built. That was an ODOT project. On the west side of that project, or Homedale south of there, is a county road, and it's a narrow county road. It's 24 feet wide. There's not enough room for bike lanes or even a shoulder to put garbage cans, and now we're ODOT closed down Summers Lane, so now that's forcing more traffic to use that section of Homedale. And during the project, we had them procure 100 feet of right-of-way on the west side of that, and of Homedale, and they used that for, they had to strip and prepare the ground for Brett Way, and so they placed the soil there instead of having an expense of hauling it off. And you'll see this windrow material, and that's where the future bike path is going to go on the side of the road, a multi-use path, and these funds would be targeted for that. It's about a $90,000 project, but it gives, and then we'll probably do some shoulder widening. If we had a do-over from 10 years ago when that project was identified, we would have urbanized that section with curb gutter and sidewalk on a wider street. That wasn't thought of at the time, and it's fairly expensive to do that. It's fairly cheap to build a multi-use path and widen the asphalt shoulders so that the post office deliveries have a chance to get off the road. The garbage truck has a little wider area for people to pass the garbage truck. So we're targeting Homedale Bike Path. We have a lot of irons in the fire for design, so we're hoping to get that designed and constructed this year. A project came up, the completion of the Patterson Foothills Bike Path. If you think of the upper part of past Homedale on Foothills, there's a gap in the multi-use path. Well, when somebody comes up Patterson on foot, then they have to walk in a 5-foot bike lane with guardrail on the side with vehicles traveling at high rates of speed, so a pedestrian doesn't have any way to connect through there. A diehard bicyclist would use the bike lanes, but a mother or father and their 5-year-old using those bike lanes is pretty spooky. And so we went to the Board of Commissioners earlier or late last year. There was a community path grant available through the state. We applied for about $1.5 million to complete that. We would need 10% matching funds on that, which would be $150,000, and that would come out of this fund also. So pretty good leverage on our funds if we're getting a 90% return by the state. So we went ahead and applied for that. Really long term, another project, let's call this a 10-year project, is getting a bike path from Running Y to, say, Moore Park. You have Lakeshore Drive. It's a 100-year-old road. It's got cliffs on one side and water and guardrail on the other side. Upgrading that road is a $3 or $4 million venture, and we would have to buy right away from hundreds of people, and it's just a really big, cumbersome project. So coming up with a cross-country route that's up on the hill above town or above that strip of Lakeshore Drive would be another project that we would target long-term for the Community Path Grant. That's a multi-million-dollar grant also, but has 4 property owners to get us there instead of hundreds of property owners. So that's on the radar screen. In between other work, we're trying to advance that and secure right away so that we can set ourselves up to apply for future funding on that. Any questions on bike ped funding?
Yeah, the bike path or multi-path along Homedale would connect from Southside Expressway to how far south?
So it would connect from where the sidewalk ends on Patterson, which is up by the churches on the hill, to where the multi-use path ends on Homedale. When you're coming up foothills, there's a nice multi-use path, but it ends at Homedale, and so there's this couple 1,000-foot gap in there, and that's what that grant would be for.
So not down by the new roundabout.
The $90,000 Homedale bike path is south of town, south of the roundabout, and it goes from the roundabout to Airway Drive or Brettway, which is the new road that was built. So just that leg of it. Eventually, it's not urbanized when you get south of there, and widening county roads for bike paths is not cost effective. But at least on that urban stretch, which is going to get developed and has more traffic on it now, that's the intent, was to put a multi-use path along there for folks to use so that they're not in the narrow county road.
Questions or other items on bicycle trails? Shall we move on to Klamath Falls streets?
So this is a account under county control for the reimbursement of city streets. This account came around a long time ago when we were sharing timber receipts with all cities. In 2013, we stopped doing that because the funding was not guaranteed at that point. Prior to that, we were receiving more revenue than we had for expenditures, so our account was growing. After that, Secure Rural Schools now is allocating $4.5 million. To put it in perspective, it wasn't unusual for us to receive $10 million in timber tax. So we stopped sharing with the cities, but this account started when we were sharing with cities, because City of Klamath Falls did get quite a bit of funds from the county. So later on, the last 10 years, the city occasionally comes to the county and requests funding for Esplanade or El Dorado or a variety of other projects. And so we use this as an accountability tool that upon, say, the Board of Commissioners agreeing to allocate the funds, we would move the funds into here so that they're not in our checking and savings account, if that makes sense. You know, you've written a check, but if it stays over here, you have a false idea of what your account balance is until that check's spent. So it can take a year or two for those projects to materialize. So we transfer it into here. And then upon completion of their construction project and invoicing the county, we would reimburse it out of this account. We had, prior to me, there was the Esplanade project, and we chuckle because we paid for it 2 or 3 times because we wrote a check up front, and then the check was used for other things, and there wasn't an accountability. And so that's where we went to this structure to have some accountability, that an invoice shows up for the project that we agreed to, and then we pay it, not at the tail end fund it. So we're kind of at the end of the construction project funding it. This funding it just kind of hangs out at the county unless the Board of Commissioners are engaged and approve deposits into it. We don't have any revenue going into it that's earmarked every year. We've talked about getting rid of the account and just transferring the 1.498 million roughly to the city and not having that account. And there's pluses and minuses to that. I'm happy, we're happy, Public Works, either way. We can make it work, and today we can, again, if a board approved funding for a project, we can keep that in the checking and savings account and not pay until an invoice is submitted. So it doesn't make sense that we have this today, but it was a useful tool when we were sharing timber dollars with the city to track those larger dollar amounts. Any questions on streets, city streets?
Just to clarify, there are no planned projects that the city has requested funds for at this time from this fund?
I think that they completed all of their projects that they had requested. A couple years ago, there was, I think it was El Dorado sidewalks, that there was a $400,000. And I think that was the last thing on this.
That's correct. Madam Chair, there was conversation at the commissioner level about just writing a check and giving this back to the city. And for the record, 3 weeks ago now, maybe a month ago now, when I was in Salem with the city manager, I brought it up to him. And he was aware of this fund, but he was extremely interested in just taking this back. So I anticipate this will be gone shortly. And quite honestly, just the world according to Dave, I don't want this account. Write a check to the city and walk away from this. We shouldn't be managing city funds.
Yep, it certainly takes an account away and simplifies, and we're spending time and money here discussing it, and it's their account.
So we're bringing it up just because of the hearing, but quite honestly, if the wheels of government turned a little bit quicker, we wouldn't even be having this conversation if we would have got this done a couple weeks ago.
Okay. Other questions or comments on Fall Streets? If not, moving on to the equipment reserve operating and federal funds.
Great, thank you. And before we get started, we've mixed and matched streets and noxious weed drainage district, but I just want to say a big thank you to, we have about 12 folks in the office, engineers, surveyors, accountants, Mary Lou and her team, and Mike, the county engineer, and Ryan. We hit home runs. You wouldn't believe the things that we were asked on a daily basis to respond to. And and the road department, Ralph and Jason out there, we have one of the best road systems in the entire state, with our pavement condition index sitting at 84. Literally, you can see where the county roads start on the city limit line, and we're real proud of that. And a lot of people work really hard for that. And a lot of times we solve these problems behind the scenes without people even hearing or seeing about them. And our crews don't like to take credit for those things. We just move on to the next emergency and nose of the grindstone and get it done. So we have a great crew, and even on the HR side of things, we don't have a lot of drama inside of our department, and that we're about 50 strong, and it shows that we actually care. That whole group cares about when we're fixing roads and bridges, and even being very thorough with the paperwork and accounts payable, all the way down to the lowest ranking staff members. Is we hire people that care. So really proud, and I'm personally proud of our department and what we accomplish on an annual basis. And I tell people every day, 150,000 people drive 150,000 trips on our system. Mother Nature, floods, fires, snow. aging roads and aging bridges, we get all of that on a daily basis. So, and that leads us to Public Works and the equipment reserve. I will touch on that first. We have a fleet of about 200 pieces of equipment, ranging from giant snow blowers to snow plow sanders to smaller equipment for the urban environment. So this year, we're seeing long lead times, and I have a little cheat sheet here that we have 2 semi-truck plow spreaders that we've ordered, and they're not delivered. Last year we fired off an order for 3 F-250s, and only one of those, we got a letter from Ford that says we're only going to honor 1 vehicle at government price, and so we automatically had a backlog. Last year they hit the mileage and the age. We typically run our vehicles to 150,000 miles for our what we call our line trucks, and they had hit that in the last budget season, and we fired off an order, and they only fulfilled 1. So recently we went to the Board of Commissioners and asked to buy one off of a lot for the first time in a really long time. So we're still down 1 and working on that. But these are taking our snow plow spreader, sander trucks, the big ones, are taking 18 months from when we start. So you'll actually see the budget for the equipment is growing, but we have I don't know, $900,000 of equipment that has been procured but not delivered. So this year we have a couple of F-250s that we're replacing. One, we bought one off of a lot. We have an F-350. We have 1 Cat motor grader. Those are some of our workhorses. They get used all winter long for removing snow on gravel roads, and they get used all summer long for maintaining gravel roads. We have 6 of those, and actually we have 7 of them, and they're on a 6-year cycle. So every year we replace one, and then it comes with a buyback. And so this year that Cat motor grader is $443,000. It has various wing plows and other things on it, but it would come with a $200,000 buyback, for example. And so the net, we have to pay $443,000, but at the end of 6 years we get $200,000 of it back. We can choose to keep it at the end of 6 years. We can choose to sell it to another agency, but we've just developed that getting that buyback up front and staying ahead of our road graders are really expensive. We run them up to about 6,000 hours, and they still have a value of $200,000. We've kept them for 7, 8, or 9 years, and then we have a $40,000 transmission fail or a $40,000 engine fail, and so we just kind of hit that sweet spot of 6 years and a buyback. Nowadays, those are getting to be more and more complex. Road graders used to be all mechanical, hydraulics, and now they're all mechanical, hydraulics, and sensors. So one of the neat things is we have GPS software that the computer talks to, and if there's a breakdown on Silver Lake, we can call for a warranty repair, and Peterson Cat already knows what's the matter with it and can dispatch out and fix it, instead of, in the old days, we'd have to get a replacement out there and tow the other one to Peterson Cat and have it repaired. And so there is a benefit to technology. We're replacing our Patch King box. It's 20 years old. That's what we use to heat up our asphalt so that we can repair potholes when we need. And we have a mastic machine. In years past, we've rented that machine for the last 4 or 5 years. We found that it works. This is the first year they've offered one at government prices, and that is a tool in our toolbox that essentially we have never been able to fill when you get a large crack on a road. when you rubber it, it still kind of has the rounded down edges, so it goes thump, thump, thump. When you put hot mix in there, it rattles out after a couple of years and you get the full crack back. Well, mastic levels off that, and we've been trying it as a pilot project for the last 3 or 4 years, and it's working great. And we've been able to repair Drew's Road for $150,000 instead of rubbleizing it and returning it back to gravel and paving it for millions of dollars. So for $150,000, we brought a road back that we thought was irreparable for the last decade, and so we got it back on track. We're pretty excited for that. And a sickle bar mower tractor, pretty small cost, $40,000 for that. Our sickle bar mower is 20 years old, and it broke down about 10 times last year when we really needed it, and it just felt like it was in the shop far too much. So when we agree upon a allocation into this, let's say it's a transfer of $1.3 million, what we do is we prorate that over 12 months. And so we divide, let's make the math really easy, 1.2 million by 12 months would be $100,000 a month that would go into that. So this is a little north of $100,000 a month. And then we procure the equipment through the Board of Commissioners, and then we only pay when it's delivered. So, questions? Okay, moving on to what was next? Federal?
It lists operating, but we can move to federal.
Either one. I have operating here.
Let's go with that then.
We'll try to go in order. Okay, operating is, it's probably been 4 or 5 years ago, a couple years after we started, we split out, we kind of had a Campbell's mushroom soup pot of money, and then we split out the secure rural schools and the federal side, and we split out the operating side. The secure rural schools was eligible for reimbursement for law enforcement. That's why we split it out when it was all in one mixed account. We couldn't tell if we were giving gas tax dollars to law enforcement, which isn't an approved expenditure of road funds. And then now we created a road service district, which is a third account, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But let's call this our primary account. Mary Lou, do you have a total dollar amount in this? Round numbers for,
Oh, how much is in it?
yeah,
50,000?
million.
Yeah, 50 million.
There's approximately 50 million. So it's the largest of our accounts. And the road service district, after we get done transferring funds, will be the second largest and have north of 20 million. And then we have a federal account that we'll get into a little bit later, and that's going to wind down to zero, hopefully. Big projects this year. So overarching public works, we budget, depending on the year, let's say 13 to 15 million. What drives our cost up are large capital projects like bridge replacements when we earmark those. But if you think of keeping the doors open and the status quo of the maintenance side of what we do, depending on the year, depending on snow removal, we're somewhere expending that $10 to $11 million a year for maintenance. And then we have a capital project on top of that. And an example of a current capital project is Stearns Corridor, getting sidewalks to the Stearns Elementary. It's the last school in the unincorporated suburb to receive sidewalks. Phase 1 of that was bid earlier this year. They're actually relocating gas lines and sewer and water right now. And when school's out in June, they're going to close the road and build the road bed and the curb gutter and sidewalk out front of the school. That's phase 1, which is the school frontage. It's about 900 feet. Phase 2 is Laverne. We can't do both projects in the same year and not have heavy equipment and kids mixing when school gets back in September. So we decided to postpone the second road project to next summer when we can close the road. That was 1.5 million, I believe. Bid price, net difference, it was actually 1.9, but 400,000 of it was 400,000 was city utility reimbursement for the water line, and South Suburban utility reimbursement for the sewer line. Road dollars can't be used for utilities either. So that's one example. Another example that we're going out for bid here pretty quick is the Shasta sidewalks east of Madison. You'll notice there's 3 or 4 blocks of sidewalk missing on the north side of the road. And we skipped that 30 years ago because there's all sorts of utility constraints and there's a really steep driveway at an apartment complex. And so we've negotiated with that person to buy their access rights, and now we can install sidewalks on that infill gap. It's important. Shasta is a collector. It's got a school. Shasta Elementary is right there, and kids are walking in the road on that side of the street. There's no safe place to cross, and so we're going to address all of that with sidewalk ramps and new sidewalk along there. That'll go to bid in the next month or so, and we're hoping that that'll get constructed this year if bid prices look good. That's about $1 million project. East Langell Valley Bridge, about 5 or 6 miles east of Bonanza. There's a bridge over the Lost River. It's a 50-year-old timber bridge. It has significant rot and decay in it. And when that occurs, we put up a black and white sign that is a weight restriction. Well, if we have a weight restriction on East Langell, that really impacts detour routes, and so people have to drive around to West Langell, which can be 30 miles out of way to go around. And worse yet, if we got a weight restriction on West Langell, there'd be no access to the far east end of East Langell or Gerber without having weight restrictions. And so as bridges deteriorate and rot occurs, we get these weight restrictions that pop up. So we've hired WH Pacific to design this bridge. So this year we're in right-of-way, environmental, and design. And we're hoping to set it up for next year to be in construction. That bridge, depending on the configurations, if it's a single-span bridge and we can get that to work, it'll be about $1.5 million. If it's a multi-span bridge, it could be as high as $2.5 or $3 million, just to put it in perspective. And that's a chunk of change with a finite amount of money in the accounts. If you were somewhere around $75 million. With hiring WH Pacific, $500,000, and let's just pick $2.5 million for the bridge. That's $3 million that's gone or going to be gone for one bridge. We have 206. We have 205 other bridges, and the average age of our bridge is about 45 years. And the last 20 years, we've tried to replace one major one a year. When I got here, we had inadequate resources. It was me and Ryan in the office, and we didn't have a team of engineers and surveyors. And so we had a lull of a few years in that, but we're getting back on track now. And so that's planned. Other big projects that are planned, Summers Lane extension across Steam Sports Complex and going to the north of Foothills. And there'll be a new intersection on Foothills. We are in the process of the traffic engineering on that and the environmental permitting on that. That'll probably take up the rest of this year. Next year would be hiring a design consultant, and the following year constructing that. Round numbers, that's a $3 million project. So you can see just the projects that we have: 1.5, 1, 3, and 3. That's north of 10% of the bank account. And this winter, West Side Road, so most county roads are in great shape. Last year, we were supposed to chip seal West Side Road through a federal land access program grant. The federal folks couldn't expedite their project to get it chip sealed last year, so we are going to have to chip seal that this year. That grant was roughly $600,000 of revenue. Unfortunately, the road blew up this winter, and we've probably spent $200,000 on fixing potholes, and we probably have $1 million to $1.5 million to come before receiving the $600,000 grant. So we're in a very expensive business, and that's where we have to be very frugal and very judicious on our use of road dollars, because our account is declining. And that West Side Road, we had no indication of that. Sprague River Road is right on the verge, and so we're going to spend the month of May paving on West Side Road, and then we're going to spend 3 months chip sealing this summer for 130 miles of chip seal, including West Side Road. And then we're going to have to get right out of that, and we're going to pave 6 miles of Sprague River Road, which is another $1.5 million or $2 million, depending on whether we contract that out or do it ourselves. Those are big numbers and worrisome. That's what keeps me up at night, of how to respond to the system, keep it in good order, but also watching accounts decline is, and so we get 12 million in a year, round numbers, 4.5 for secure rural schools and 7.5 for gas tax and vehicle apportionment. So we get 12 million in. Status quo maintenance without anything blowing up or any big bridge projects is 10 to 11. And so, but it's not very difficult to have $1 million problems on these other projects that would go backwards. And then the name of the game becomes, we could expedite all of those and do them in the same year. It's planning it out with our internal resources. We are cheaper and can deliver projects for paving projects cheaper than hiring a contractor. That being said, we have a finite amount of resources, and you can see that right now in May we have to pave West Side Road, and we have to crack seal 100 miles of roads to prep for 130 miles of chip seals, and that gets us all the way through September. And then we have to hope that weather in October is conducive to paving, and then when we're done with that mess or headache, snow starts, and we have a $500,000 to $1.5 million snow removal season, and so we're in this dance, and at the mercy of Mother Nature and degradation of our system. And so on the operating side of things, we do have a staff increase that we're looking at. We would like to hire 2 utility ones at the road department. In the past, Public Works has balanced. We saw the account declining at $2 to $3 million a year. The bulk of that was law enforcement each year has requested between 2 and 2.5 million. So we actually downsized our department, knowing that the writing's on the wall, whether it's 10 years from now or 20 years from now, that the account's going to decline. Now that we've set up the road service district, that allows us to incrementally get a couple of positions back, and that will help us get ahead of some of these problems and be able to crack seal and pave better. It'll allow us to provide better snow removal services. If you think of, we have a route that somebody drives 450 miles for snow removal, and when you drive that distance, you can only make 1 pass a day. Well, by having 1 or 2 extra folks out there, and we've replaced equipment at the road shop, but we haven't sold the old equipment, so we have the spare equipment, so we can break that snow removal into 2 routes and make a couple of passes a day, which is a service increase to folks. We're behind on ditches along our county road network. If you think we have 1,700 miles of ditches, and the jungle reclaims the ditches every year, and even if the jungle isn't reclaiming it, the sedimentation from flood events and other things filling your ditch. So we're behind on that. We have 100 miles of the 860 miles is gravel roads, and we're behind on gravel road maintenance. And then it'll help us with we're seeing more and more bridge repairs. So we think by adding 2 utility ones, which is the bottom line entry-level staff at the road department, that will be able to, we need 3 or 4, but we're starting at 2, and then we're gonna see how that goes. We do have 1 office survey engineer technician that we're also looking to hire. We have speed studies and drainage issues for Keno and all that we tend to get allocated and called for, and we're barely keeping ahead of the road network, let alone some of these tasks tend to stack up. So that's the big staffing, capital projects on the operating side of things. So any questions there?
Okay. Thank you, Jeremy. That was really informative. Just a quick question. First question is just a clarifying question. You said $7.5 million from gas tax, but on here for 2024 requested at 6.9. Is this just a conservative number?
Yes, it is. So they project $7.5 million. It's a projection.
Okay.
So we typically take, say 10% off of that and put that on the revenue side.
Okay.
And if you underestimate revenue and overestimate expenses, when you get down to brass tacks, then you've balanced the scales for the worst case scenario, and then we deliver it better than that. And what that does is it reduces the amount of budget resolutions that we need during the year, because we have the money in an account. We don't spend it unless we absolutely have to, and then it becomes on West Side Road, for instance. If we hadn't done that, last year we budgeted $800,000. We're going to spend $1.5 million possibly on that. I would have to come to the board and under duress to get a budget resolution to approve that to go to work. And right now we're going to work. So.
I like the conservative approach on budgeting. I think that just puts us in a better financial position when the revenues come in better than anticipated. So thanks, I appreciate that. The second question that I had, Jeremy, I'm glad to hear you talk about protection of road funds. I agree with you. I know the commissioners agree with you as well. So we won't get into that today. But here's kind of a question and kind of my fear. I think it's highly important that we protect our road funds, because I think this gas tax is actually going to go down as electric vehicles continue to go up. Has there been any forecasting by the state on what these gas tax revenues are going to look like on the out years with more and more electric cars?
Yes, a lot of folks don't know that about 18 months ago, I believe, the state closed the loophole on gas tax. And so if you look at your new vehicle registration fee, I have a vehicle that's, the sticker says 17 miles a gallon. I just got my registration, it was $126. But if I have a friend that has a Tesla, and they went to register their Tesla, and their registration fee is $600. And so the intent is that you have to pick an average number that everybody drives, but the intent the state had was to equal the playing field. And prior to doing this about 18 months ago, there was this decline occurring as vehicles got, not just electric vehicles, but as vehicles get better and better gas mileage, the gas tax revenue comes down. So that has been closed. It doesn't account for, let's say 10 or 15 years from now, 80% of the fleet being electric. It doesn't account for that level, but it's a stopgap for the next couple of years in order to arrest the downward trend of gas tax.
Do those registration fees then come back to the counties as a form of gas tax?
Yes, so the vehicle apportionment is, we call road funds gas tax, but it's called vehicle apportionment at the highest level,
So
and
it's
that
both.
includes registration fees and gas tax.
Thank you. That was my only question. Thanks.
Do we have other questions for Public Works?
needs to listen to that.
I think before we wrap up on general public works, we have the Federal Reserve.
Great.
And then we'll move into the road service district. So the Federal Reserve was that pot of money where we received secure rural school funds in. And then again, that was eligible for reimbursement of law enforcement expenses. The commissioners have set up a road service district, which we'll talk about next. But the Federal Reserve, out of the 860 miles of roads, 200 of them are what we call federal forest highways. And they're eligible for, that's why we get the secure rural schools. It's a bad name for the program, but it was meant for roughly half of the county and other counties being state or federally owned. And so they don't pay property tax. And then we used to have the timber tax, which funded roads and schools and law enforcement. And then secure rural schools is that stopgap for the last probably 20 some years. And so that used to be mixed in, then we separated it out into these two pots. This had an account balance of around 24 million, if I recall. Recently, the board set up the road service district. We're planning on, I believe, transferring down to about 2 million in the federal account. And then we maintain those 200 miles of roads, and until about 4 or 5 years ago, we didn't really track our expenses on those forest roads. We do now, and we know that there's a cost to chip sealing, striping, signage, snow removal. And so at the end of the year, we pay for all of that out of operating. At the end of the year, we have a transfer out of federal to compensate for the 200 miles of expenses that we had on those road systems. So we're transferring down to 2 million, and then we have one more transfer internal of operating for this year's snow removal and chip seals and all of that. And so eventually this will probably go down to 0. It's hard, if you over transfer and you took it down 1 million and then we asked for 1.3 million, then you'd have to transfer money back, and it becomes a paperwork issue at some point. Now, we are going to keep that account around because if the STBG funds that we get in, which are trickle through the state for federal gas tax funds, we get $750,000 a year roughly in those. We used to fund exchange those for state dollars to remove the federal requirements off of them. And so we used to fund exchange 2 years ago at 94 cents on the dollar. And then 1 year ago, ODOT changed that to 90 cents on the dollar. This year, ODOT has a $500 million budget deficit coming down the pipeline. And so they're going to go into the red next year. They're taking fund exchange away, which then may require us to receive $750,000 of fully earmarked federal funds. And the only place for us to put them and track them is here. We really hope they, in our case, they allow us to transfer state highway bridge dollars from House Bill 2017 so that we still get a fund exchange benefit and we can go procure and use it on a bridge replacement like East Langell, as opposed to having fully earmarked federal funds. And then we need environmental studies, we need Buy America requirements. Not that that's bad, I'm just listing the examples. We need all of the, when we buy right away, we need appraisals and all of that. So a $750,000 federal project, we in the industry estimate 30 to 40% of that goes to paperwork and these requirements. And so we're better to, in the past, to fund exchange for 90 cents on the dollar because it's not costing us 40 cents on the dollar to go full federal. So we're going to keep that account around and occasionally may deposit into it depending on this fund exchange conversation that's going on at the state level right now. So that's all I had on the federal side. Any questions there?
If we don't have any questions, then For the road service district, we will first recess our budget hearing for Klamath County. And then we will open the public hearing on the Klamath County Road Service District budget for today, April 18th. Originally scheduled for 10 o'clock, so we're running about 10 minutes behind. And then I would like to ask Finance Director Vicki for budget message.
We all have copies of the budget message. I think it'd be a better use of our time just to know they're there. They're online for the public to read as well. And so I could read a little bit of the highlights, but I think Jeremy's probably going to say the same things that I will.
Okay.
So.
Okay. First, I'd like to ask for public comment. And being none, please share, Jeremy. Thank you so much.
Great. This road service district was set up countywide last year, and the intent of this road service district is to deposit the secure rural schools funding into this, the part that's allocated for roadways. And the SRS funding, a lot of folks don't know that by the time it hits the road district or even the road department's revenue, the 25% for the schools is already taken off the top. And so we see that as a revenue of about 4.5 million to the road department. As I alluded to earlier, that's down from about 10 million in timber tax. So our road system didn't magically get smaller, it stayed the same, and we're getting that $5.5 million less. It is a nice stopgap. They legislation earmarked this to be at the 2017 levels. 10 years ago, if you would have asked, they were on a 20-year plan to wean us off of this. So each year it got 5% less, and so it started at that $10 million range, and then through 2017 was down to 4.5, and it was headed to 0. But they realized that in rural areas such as Klamath County, that 50% is state or federally owned, it's impossible to have the road network and the schools and the law enforcement without having this supplement. So they, I forget what that stopgap is. Commissioner Groot, I think, was involved in that, and if it's a permanent stopgap or if it had a time clock on it, or for the next 5 years, they're going to keep it at 2017. So.
Oh, the reauthorization of SRS?
Yeah.
3 years. The
Yeah.
last reauthorization was a 3-year authorization.
Okay. So it's still up in limbo. We have missed this payment, and there was a year where we received 0. It hasn't been in the last 6 years since I've been here, but just shortly before that.
Right before.
All county roads are eligible for expenditure out of here. But the intent is that we receive $4.5 million over here, and on the payment in lieu on the general fund side, in the past, if the county received the SRS funds directly, then they were subtracted off of the payment in lieu, the PILT funds. And so let's say there was $8.5 million in PILT coming in. I'm just making these numbers up, but last year they paid us $4.5 in SRS. Then PILT would only get net of $4 million deposited. Well, since this goes to the district now, it doesn't count as monies paid directly to the county. So the theory is, with fingers crossed, that the PILT payment is $8.5 million and that the SRS payment is $4.5 million.
So quick correction, so the PILT would be closer to like 3.2. It's currently going to be around $950,000 should we be hit for the prior year payment on SRS.
Yeah. So.
And SRS is, for last year and the next 2 years, 4.347, 421 or something like that.
And what that,
I think it's also important to point out that that's very creative, but that's not a guarantee. So we'd like to see the extra revenues, but we shouldn't count on it.
We will know in May of 2024.
so
And we budgeted not counting on it.
Right.
conservative.
So next year, we might have an additional couple $1 million, which would be excellent, but we really shouldn't plan that we're going to get that money.
And so that's this road service district, and that the revenue will be into the district. We're going to treat it just like the federal account where we have those 200 miles, and we're going to pay for it out of operating, but once or twice a year, depending on the season. For summer work, we'll transfer out the 200 miles of cost for chip seal, striping, and all of that. And then coming down the home stretch to the end of the fiscal year, we'd have one more transfer for the snow removal and spring work that we've done on those roads. And so it acts as how we had the Federal Reserve account before, and we're now tracking those costs for those, what we designate forest highways that are required to be county maintained. 32 bridges and 200 miles of roads. But it is eligible for any county road expenditure, kind of as a savings account. But if we want to take the East Landville Valley bridge cost out of there, it's available to do that. Questions on road service district?
If we don't have any questions or items to discuss,
We have a document to present.
Is that the road service district document?
Yes.
I'll read it again. I'll make a motion the budget committee hereby approve the budget for fiscal year 23-24, now on file with the Klamath County Board of Commissioners, in the sum of $30,440,000.
Second.
do we have any discussion? If no discussion, then call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion carries.
Thank you, and thank you, Mary Lou, for
You're welcome.
an inch worth of budgeting documents.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate your acknowledgement of the team and everything that folks do every day. So with that, we will close the budget hearing on the Klamath County Road Service District budget and adjourn the Road Service District budget, and we are scheduled to break until 10:30.
Perfect.
It's because it only happens once a year.
And we're super intimidating.
I
I mean,
know.
just look at us.
Lucky me, truly.
Could be much worse.
I don't have any questions. I'm really excited for the building project. I mean, it's something that the extension district has been working on for quite some time. We had this idea, now this, and so I think it's going to be a great location, and really excited for that. So thank you for all your work in making that come together, and the board for some vision and getting a building that can work.
Thank you. It's really been such a collaborative effort, and the support from you guys has been tremendous, and I think that's what's really making it a reality. So
Well, it's just a reflection of the community support because you guys do such good work.
thank you.
I'll just add a comment. As a commissioner and as a cattle rancher, I've worked with OSU Extension in both capacities, and I just want to say I'm always impressed at how eager OSU is to step up to the plate to help our agricultural community and find really creative and innovative solutions to lots of issues that we're having in the basin. But I have yet to hear no from OSU Extension, and I just really, really thank you again as a commissioner and as a landowner, as a rancher, as a producer. Your investment in our community is incredible, and I just want to say thank you.
Thank you. It's about how, right? How, not no.
Studs.
Are there any others for questions or discussion? And we have two motions as part of this budget hearing.
So we need to do the assessment first, is that right?
No, we need to adopt.
Adopt
Or
first?
approved, sorry, approved.
So not the imposition. First the budget, then the imposition? Okay. So I'll make a motion, the budget committee hereby approves the budget for fiscal year 23-24, now on file with Clemson County Board of Commissioners, in the sum of $2,128,431.
Second?
Any discussion? Call for vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstain?
Aye.
The motion carries.
Next, I'll make a motion, the budget committee hereby approve the imposition of the ad valorem tax provided for in the approved budget for fiscal year 23-24 at the rate of 15 cents per 1,000 of assessed value for operations, and approves the categorization of the taxes to the general fund of the district. Fiscal impact estimated $912,020 ad valorem property taxes for fiscal year 23-24.
Second.
Discussion? Call for vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain?
Point of clarification, Mr. Chair, Commissioner DeGroot.
Yeah.
Do I need to abstain from the tax or just from
I don't think
their
so.
budget?
The budget, but the imposition of the taxes, I think that
Correct.
you'd be
That
fine
one,
on.
as a commissioner, I can vote on that piece, correct?
I would think that you would be great.
Aye.
Motion carries. And with that, I believe we've covered the budget hearing for the Klamath County Extension Service District budget. And with that, we'll close the hearing.
Yep.
And thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We will now reopen the county budget hearing with the general fund non-departmental.
Okay. So I think everyone knows the general fund non-departmental is where we receive property taxes. It is where we transfer money out of the general fund and into, well, not out of the general fund. We transfer
you.
money to other general fund departments to allow them for their it's their operating revenue. The other things that would go into the general fund non-departmental are things like the State Board of Forestry payments, small rail car, cigarette taxes, amusement taxes, liquor revenues, and things of that nature. A lot of the taxing districts get percentages of those revenues, and Klamath County is no exception. We get distribution of those revenues as well. There is a advance tax payment that we do every year. to the small districts. Any district that we have an appropriation of property taxes for $100,000 or less, we give them an annual payment. And so during the year, as those taxes come in, we reimburse ourselves for the advance payment that we made to the district. So you'll see the property taxes at $11.8 million. However, that's $1.5 million over what the county is actually going to get, because in expenses you'll see a $1.5 million distribution to districts. So our tax revenue is actually the 10 is 10.3. The other important part of general fund non-departmental this year is we need $4 million in cash between July and November. We're a little bit short of that number by $246,307. We also, in this budget, you'll see a transfer in from, it says PILT reserve, it's really been renamed to the general fund reserve because we have the LATCF funds in that fund right now. You'll see a transfer into the non-departmental of $2.5 million. 812,000 of that is being transferred into the equipment reserve, and the reason that the board asked that that be proposed is due to removing the transfer to equipment reserve from the sheriff's office into the equipment reserve. That's been removed from the sheriff's office budget this year, and we thought we would use 812,000 from LATCF to fund the equipment reserve for the 24 year. It's proposed. The rest of the 2.5 million is part of the transfers out to the various general fund departments. The only departments that receive a general fund contribution that are not in the general fund are public health, code enforcement, and surveyor. Well, we do have a little bit for parks, and that we do own Spence Mountain now, and so it really doesn't belong anywhere other than parks because we're considering that a park, and we are going to transfer $14,000 to the Parks Department to pay for the permits that will be required this year. See, after the budget workshops, we had a meeting where we figured what we thought our deficit was in the general fund, and so the Board of Commissioners had asked that I request an exercise from the directors in the general fund departments and the internal service departments to see what would happen if they had to accept a 3% increase in revenue transfers this fiscal year. And so each department head in the general fund, as you hear from them, they'll be able to tell you what would happen to their departments, what would happen to the services they provide to the citizens if they were asked not to receive this transfer into their budget. I do have a list of some of the departments that are over that 3% increase. The assessor is at 99,000 over a 3% increase from current fiscal year contribution. The tax collector is 49,000 over. The clerk is 28,000 over. The water master is 6,000 over. The DA is 46,000 over, and juveniles 84,000 over, and the sheriff's office is 320,000 over. So it just, and one of the main thing is personnel. There were a lot of reclassifications and cost of living increases, and once those are granted, it's kind of out of their control to mess around too much with that. But you know, the exercise I think was worth it.
You should note, so the tax collector, assessor, and clerk were also significantly impacted by anticipated reduction in the amount of dollars that are received from the state through the CAFA grant. That's a whole thing that we don't have to listen to me about, but, you know, as that goes down, the dollars have to come from somewhere, so you see an increase in general fund to supplant that loss.
We did just receive our ONC payment this week. It was $741,000, and we do have only $600,000 budgeted in ONC revenues for '24. So I believe we can confidently increase that in this proposed budget by about $125,000. It should the committee want to go that route.
So if we make that adjustment from 6 to 741, that's 114. I'm trying to do math in my head, and as you know, I became a cop, not a mathematician for a very specific reason. What's the deficit?
$128,711.97.
112?
128,
128.
711.97.
So let's call it 129.
So there would be, that would include if the committee decides to increase the assessor an additional,
Assessor and clerk.
okay, assessor an additional 2% and the clerk an additional 5%. That would be the number, 128,711.
Okay. Thank you.
Another option that we have, if I find that the cash isn't available before property taxes come in and we are going into a negative cash situation, we could borrow funds from RISC or LATCF to make it through that. That's just a Band-Aid, obviously. It's not a way to, it's really not, it's not sustainable. So just keep that in mind if that becomes.
Remind me in this budget what the draw from LATCF was already.
2.5 million.
2.5, and that's kind of where we wanted to cap, right?
That's the discussion that we had in workshops. I think the desire, if we were going to have that fund take us through the 5-year period that, you know, we've discussed that we need,
Right.
It really needs to be closer to 2.2, but I
2.2,
think that we're
right.
being conservative in some other areas, and we have other anticipated revenues, so hopefully that works itself out.
If there were to be a loan for a cash crunch, does the county have like a policy or procedure on any interest that's charged on internal short-term borrowings?
In the past, if we have short inter-fund loans that are less than a year, we don't charge interest. We have a form, or not a form, but we actually have a resolution that needs to be passed by the board that says we can do that.
Okay.
But we usually don't charge ourselves interest.
Okay, so there wouldn't be any borrowing costs associated.
Exactly. Are there any other comments? Is everyone of the in agreement that an extra 125,000 on the ONC revenue side makes sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you have any other questions or items for the general fund non-departmental? Moving on to finance.
Okay, finance is one of the departments within internal services. And this year, the major differences, the board had added a grant manager to our staff. This fiscal year, might have been just at the end of last fiscal year. That person has been extremely busy, and she needed help, so we do have an additional full-time employee right now that's a contracted employee from a temporary employment agency. That is also in this budget. You'll see in the revenues under interdepartmental service charge, we went from receiving $12,000 in the past to $162,000. That additional 150,000 is due to administrative fees from the grants that are allowed to pay for the grant manager's time administering the grants, and for the part-time or the full-time person actually that we have hired. The finance department runs a mail service for the rest of the county. We have a mail machine in there, and we buy all the postage. We run the mail through the machine. The post office comes to our office for that. So you'll see a reimbursement from postage of $100,000. That reimbursement is from the other departments paying us to buy all the postage and run all the postage. So you'll also see a corresponding $100,000 postage expense further on in the budget. We also received some of the A&T grant money because the finance department processes the property tax turnover, so there are pieces of our office and our personnel expenses that are paid by the A&T grant. You'll see a contract personnel services line item. That is where the full-time employee for domestic well grants is being paid from. We went out for RFP for audit services this year. We only received one response, and the cost of the audit fees were increased by right around 10%. And I am attributing that to just basically inflation, because there's a lot of inflation in this budget. We've had quite the turnover this last year as well, so that's expensive in itself. We've had several. I think we've had 4 position changes out of 7 people, so that's been kind of a struggle this year for everyone in finance. I've increased the travel and training. Our financial analyst. We have several software programs, and I want to make sure that she has the training that she needs so that we get the best use of the software. I mean, you can have every software program in the world, but if you're not using it correctly, it's not really worth the money that you're spending. So I want to make sure that we're using our software systems appropriately. So I boosted the travel and training a little bit this year so that she could go to a couple of additional trainings on the software that we're using. And the last change in finance that I wanted to point out is a transfer to equipment reserve. Our office is very open and it's pretty loud, and we don't have high cubicle walls, and so I'm interested in trying to create more of a private space for people to work. It's distracting. I've had a lot of complaints about that. So I'm trying to set aside an extra $62,000 to do some finance furniture remodeling and create just a more private environment for people. If I can't make it and I need that $62,000, then I won't do the transfer to the equipment reserve. I'll keep it in the finance budget. Any questions?
I have a couple. Let's see if I can ask this the right way. A lot of our departments in the county receive funds from the state via the A&T grant. And I really am proud that we budgeted conservatively on our numbers. So a lot of the departments, well, all of the departments that receive that grant budgeted less this year than past years because of an anticipation of those going down. I think that's the right approach. But my question is, if those grant funds come in as they have in years past, and those budgets then increased, if the revenue increased in all of the departments that receive those grants, any idea how much that offsets the 129 we're missing? And the reason I ask that is because I also recognize that a lot of these departments are not general fund departments, but they're receiving general fund dollars to make them whole. So if that grant came in as it has in years past, there isn't a deficit on that grant. It will have a positive financial impact, revenue impact on many departments that won't need a little bump from the general fund.
Correct.
So what's that offset? How much closer does that get us to the 129 we need to find?
I don't know exactly what it will be, and no one would know because it's going to depend on how many recordings we have in the clerk's office. It's going to, we really don't know until it actually happens.
Mm-hmm.
The application for CAFA is due May 1st, and then by June 1st, we should have a prediction of what the revenues will be by June 1st. History has told me that those do not always turn out like they think they're going to.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd have to say that to be safe, I wouldn't know until the money starts coming in.
Okay.
If we do receive additional revenues, the additional amount that has been provided by the general fund will go back to the non-departmental.
Right.
The rest of the money will be returned.
Is there a way, not this moment, but in the next, I don't know, 6 hours or so, is there a way just to look back at the years past on that fund?
I actually
And
have that.
if we received the same dollars we received last year, so for example, just this budget, the proposed is $8,000. Last year's adopted was 10,000, but the 22 actual was 9,800. So I recognize between 8,000 and 9,800 is only $1,800, but if we took every single department that was impacted, I'm just curious, what might that look like? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So if we received the dollars next year that we received last year, if the state held us flat, there wasn't an increase, wasn't a decrease, I'm just curious how much closer that gets us to the 129 that we're trying to find.
I'd say right off the top of my head, knowing how much people have cut back on the CAFA, it would probably only make a difference of less than $50,000, probably between $25,000 and $50,000.
So is it safe for me just to make an assumption that we'd still be about 100 off if we got the same revenue this year as we got last year?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, that was a long question,
That's
but
okay.
My only comment is that especially on the audit fees, I know 10% is quite the big jump. We've seen something similar with technology fees increasing from the auditors, as well as, labor costs internal that those firms have had as well. So, anecdotal, but just wanted to share why support of that fee or that cost expense going up.
And it's mandatory, as everyone knows, you have to have the audit. So it's not like, and we got one response to the RFP. So.
Yeah.
Has it been the same firm putting in the proposals year after year?
We had a different firm about 13 years ago for a few years, and since 2015, it's been the same firm.
And is the proposals based on price or qualifications?
The proposals are based on qualifications. Price is one component of the scoring structure of the proposals. But with the RFP, it's based on, experience, service, that kind of thing.
We've heard and seen as well that fewer firms are proposing just because of their own staffing levels. So from their own business risk, they're only proposing on what they feel that they can, complete service.
The airport has to solicit for engineering design fees services for 5-year periods, and it's a general rule of thumb that unless the airport lets it known that they are unhappy with their incumbent, for the most part, the other companies that would be in competition may or may not submit proposals because they're kind of like, hey, you're probably going to stick with your incumbent. So it tends to drive down the number of proposals we see year to year for those services, just because they kind of figure the incumbent has got the lead in getting the contract again. So.
do we have any other questions or discussion about finance? We can move on to treasurer.
Okay, so in the treasurer's budget, the treasurer is funded half with general fund dollars and half with investment earnings from our investment portfolio. This fiscal year, that's changed to more of a 30-70 or 80-20. We went ahead and lowered the amount of funding from the general fund to help with the shortfall there, and increase the amount of money from investment earnings to help fund the treasurer's office. Everything else about it, the treasurer is an elected position. I'm the elected treasurer. The amount of time requirement for it, we list as a 0.3 FTE. The responsibilities are a little easier for somebody that's in the finance director role, as it kind of a lot of the duties blend in a little bit with the finance director. So it's kind of nice to have those both together. I do have a contract maintenance line item with government portfolio advisors. They are advisors. They buy the bonds. They help me decide, what might be the best purchase, what might be something to stay away from, that kind of thing. And so that's a contract that I really rely on pretty heavily. I only expect to spend $49,000 this year on it. I put $60,000 in the budget because there is a caveat in their contract that says if we go over X amount in our portfolio value, that it will increase. So I just wanted to be on the safe side and have that in the budget just in case it happened. The rest is fairly flat.
Madam Chair. Vicki, help me remember why we combine salaries and wages with the elected official compensation.
That's
forgot
an
why.
error.
Okay.
The elected official compensation should be 21,000-ish.
Yeah.
And then the other amount is, I have a 0.75 employee that does all the cash receipting in the county. All the cash receipts come into her. She monitors all the electronic payments that come into all the banks, and she posts them where they need to go in the accounts. So she's the one, and hers is 23,000.
So the final documentation, those will get split back out?
Yes.
Okay.
Then
I did miss something. I thought I missed something. Okay.
In fact, Susan's already fixed it.
Thank you,
I
Susan.
saw it this morning.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions or discussion items? Treasurer?
Nope.
So with that, so make sure I have all the documents needed. I'd like to recess our budget hearing for Klamath County.
Can I interrupt
Oh, excuse me,
just
yes,
for
yes,
1 second?
please.
The first item for the library is the external services
Oh.
fund, and that is actually part of the county.
Thank you, that's my mistake, thank you
No,
so
no
much.
problem.
So we will reopen the county budget hearing and talk about external services for the library.
Good morning, Director.
Good morning.
And my apologies for skipping over you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for being here. Good morning, Budget Committee. Cindy, you want to come up? So I am the library director. I'm Natalie Johnston. This is Cindy Williams. She's a business manager, and here's my assistant director. And so the external services is part of the county. It's not part of the library service district. And usually you talk about it.
I do, okay. I can talk about it if you want me to.
Not a lot.
So what I know about extension services is that since the library, it has its own district, their employees are actually employees of Klamath County. So every year, the library service district has an expense in their budget that pays the county for their employees. So that's basically what it is.
Yes.
You can talk about your FTE and up and down and part-time and full-time. And
Yes, we have a lot of part-time. Most of the branch staff are staffed by part-time people. And I cannot remember exact number. It's 33.5 FTE total, but it's actually 50 bodies. That's what we have in the county. And we have 28 full-time person, 1 half-time, and 28 part-time in the county. And the main difference this year compared with last year is we are raising 4% COLA. So that's the main difference we have.
Any questions or discussion?
Not sure at all.
Madam Chair, a comment, not a
Yes.
question. I had the opportunity to say this in our recent business meeting. As the library's liaison, I got to sit down with every staff member in the library recently, and they are the most satisfied, love their work, purposeful, love their leadership staff I've probably ever sat with. So I just want to compliment the library leadership and every single staffer there. I could not get someone to say something bad about working at the library if I tried. It was really, really impressive at how much they love serving their patrons.
That's fantastic. So with that, I would like to recess the budget hearing for Klamath County and then open the hearing for today, April 18th at 11, a little bit early, 11:11, for the public hearing on the Klamath County Library Service District budget. And so with that, do we do public comment first?
Mhm.
And so I'd like to ask for public comment.
I don't need a microphone. I'm a retired college professor with a big voice. My name is Elaine Deutschman. I'm a library volunteer, a member of the Friends of the Library Board, and a volunteer in the booking joint. And I can't tell you the number of people from out of town who come through that library and comment how it is so much better than any other library they have been in the state, and how our bookie joint is one of the most fun places they have been in a long, long time. You can't do enough for Klamath County if you keep this library running the way it is now. It is sending out vibes all over the state to say, if you want to see a good public library, go to Klamath Falls. So I would encourage you to pass the proposed budget. Natalie works very hard to keep everything neat and tidy and carefully funded, and there isn't a bit of waste. So come to the library, you guys. Come to the bookie joint. You will have a good time. Thank you.
My name's Judy Izzo, and I'm the president of the Board of Friends of the Library. And just to piggyback on Elaine, it's we support the library, help raise funds for the library. We run the bookie joint, we write grants. And just recently, I did a on-site visit with one of our funders, and she has her office in Portland, and we gave her a tour of the bookie joint, and she was like, "This is like so much better than Multnomah County has," and also just what the library does for children in this county and for mothers and for families is just irreplaceable and absolutely impressive and fantastic. So I know there's some other things I wanted to say. Oh, just one of my favorite, before I became the president of the board, I worked for the Bookie Joint and then was the volunteer coordinator for a while. And just being in the Bookie Joint and seeing children come in with hands full of change and walking out with books that cost 25 cents. And for a business, any business, just challenge me to any business who runs part-time and charges 10 cents, 25 cents, $1 for their product. We make about $10,000 a year from the Bookie Joint. So anyway, I just want to support you in supporting the library. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Chuck Wells. I'm the chairman of the Library Advisory Board, and it's been a pleasure again this year to serve in that capacity. If you wanted to see a true model of exquisite management, I think you've got the perfect team in front of you. And we are working with the county in a lot of ways because we utilize the services of your department, and it was constructed that way so that we would be interlocked with the county. And I could go on and on and on about it, but I'm really honored to still be the chair since 2000. And I keep telling the board when it's time to tell me to quit, let me know, and they say it's a life sentence. So we'll have to see how that works out. Life sentence isn't now today what it used to be like. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. With that, we can move to the presentation. Thank you so much.
All right, wow. So the library district has 3 funds. So we have a general fund and a reserve fund and external services that we already went through. The significant changes for this next fiscal year, we are anticipating property tax revenue increase by 2%. For material and services expenditure, we will increase that by 4%. We have an increase in insurance, contract services increase. We are going to work on our strategic planning, and we are planning to hire a library consultant to help us do that. We are also going to increase our software support. We are planning to add more online program. And supplies is going to be higher next year because we are spending more money in ink. And also we have more and more people visiting, and that means we have to buy more supplies for when they are visiting our facilities. And interdepartmental charges will increase by 4%. This is due to an increase in personal services and also in an increase in technical services charges. And the request fund balance for next fiscal year, beginning fund balance for the general fund is $1,590,967, and the requested beginning fund balance for the reserve fund is $1,339,186. I don't know if you have any questions?
Questions?
I would just comment and commend the library for the amount of activities that you are scheduling to encourage people to come to the library, whether that's game nights or other activities to sort of get youth or other groups into the library and then hopefully keep them there with all the other opportunities they're fine. But it takes some creative thinking outside the box. You're doing a great job on that.
If we don't have any other discussion, questions, or comments, I'd ask for a motion to approve the budget.
I'll make a motion, the Budget Committee hereby approves the budget for fiscal year 22-23 now on file with the Klamath County Board of Commissioners in the sum of $6,105,425.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
I'm going to make a motion, the Budget Committee hereby approves the imposition of the ad valorem tax provided for in the approved budget for fiscal year 23-24 at the rate of 49 cents per 1,000 of assessed value for operations, and approves the categorization of the taxes to the general fund of the district. Fiscal impacts $2,927,400 estimated ad valorem property taxes for fiscal year 23-24.
Second.
Call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you so much for your time.
I have one more.
Oh, excuse me.
All library.
But you have to close.
Yes. So with that, we'll close the hearing for the Klamath County Library Service District budget, and we will reopen the county budget hearing with the law library.
The law library. Yes. So the law library is inside the main library, but it's funded primarily by a portion of fees collected by the courts. And the secondary source of revenue as at-cost charges when people come and buy copies for court paper. And significant changes for next fiscal year will be a personal increase of 6%. Our person who's working for the law library, she works 75% of her time there and 25% of her time at the library. And she's going to have a step increase next year. We also have an increase of interest on investment and a slight reduction of revenue from the copies.
Questions or discussion, comments on the library, law library? With that, I'd like to thank you again so much. Really appreciate your team.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you.
And so with that, moving on to other funds.
Yeah, can I get you to sign the
Excuse-
front page of those two documents that she has?
And that's why the library gets their tax levies back.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie.
So other funds, equipment reserve.
So, Equipment Reserve Fund is a fund set up to allow general fund departments to put aside funding for capital purchases. Right now, the assessor's office has $67,000 available. I'm sorry, they do have more than that. They actually have $74,000 available. The tax collector has $12,000. Property sales, $39,000. The clerk's office, $53,000. Sheriff, patrol has $43,000, but I expect that to be zero by the end of the current fiscal year. The corrections department, which is the jail, has $240,000. The civil division has just under $10,000. Animal control has just short of $67,000. Juvenile, $10,000. Emergency management has $55,000. for a total of $605,374 currently, and that's, the year isn't over with yet, so it won't be that high. So if you look at the equipment reserve budget in revenues, there's a section that shows who contributes. There's the 812 I talked about earlier from the general fund. And right now, emergency management is the only department in the general fund that has been able to budget anything in equipment reserve other than the 812 that was put in from LATCF. I do have a capital outlay request form. It's out here. It's under department presentation. Bear with us while we find the capital outlay request. Department presentations. Outlay. 32. Just do sheriff. The only general fund department that I received capital outlay requests from in this budget is the sheriff's office. So any of those lines that start with 3010, those are all requests from them to be spent out of this fund. Several patrol vehicles, washer and dryer in the jail, and a vehicle for the jail. And those other two are not in this budget. Those are in the special revenue budget for the sheriff's office. So that's where I budgeted the equipment and vehicles other from in the expenditure capital outlay section.
Is that a normal equipment outlay schedule purchase for the sheriff's patrol vehicles? I mean, is that I'm sure they're on a set schedule for replacement.
They are not. I think they buy as needed and as they can afford it, you know, as they've put money aside. A lot of years they'll put exactly enough money aside as what they feel they need for that year. We've talked a lot about a capital improvement plan. I actually attended a 3-day class on how to set that up, how to work with other departments on setting that up. So that is a goal of ours going forward. I just haven't been able to roll it out with the other departments and talk to the board too much about it yet. But that does make a lot of sense moving forward. But this is a little heavier maybe than typical years. Last year I believe they asked for about $570,000. This year it's $812,000. So this is a little higher than I'd say an average year.
I know you walked us through the balances available by the different departments. For what's been requested, do they have sufficient monies on hand?
For the other departments?
No, for the sheriff, for what the sheriff's requested, do they have contributions to cover?
Well, actually what they are requesting is $812,000, which is exactly what we have set aside from LATCF for equipment reserve. So that's kind of the correlation between those two things.
Okay, thank you.
Given how difficult vehicles are to get purchased these days, is there a certain level of confidence that what they would like to purchase, they're actually going to be able to purchase? I know it's probably a little hard to actually make that determination, but
it goes in spurts, like the corrections department had budgeted for 2 pickups and they're getting 4. I mean, they just were available, so it just goes in spurts, kind of. I don't know how to explain it or what to make, what to make of it, but I think it's component parts or something. I mean, I don't know a lot about it, but I think it's some kind of component part to a vehicle that has been delayed in processing and transportation.
Dave, would you happen to know, is there a more steady pipeline available for emergency service vehicles just for their necessity?
No. See how I want to answer this. I don't want to speak for the sheriff, so I want to be careful and not say something that isn't going to be something he supports. I think I know those answers, but give me a little bit of grace. A lot of it is timing. So let me back up even further. You'll appreciate this, Linda. We had a CIP at the city. So we had a 7, 8, 9, I can't remember the length of time, outlook on our capital. And we knew what we were going to spend on all of those out years. So we were planning on those out years, and that's what Vicki was just getting to. We don't have that at the county. So it's just year to year to year. There isn't any forecasting. So when we get our CIP done for all of the departments in the county, on July 1, we can order cars for that FY because we know what we have agreed that we can afford and we're going to buy on all of these out years. So we need to develop that at the county. We haven't done that yet. So the sheriff's office, when the budget's approved, they start that process rather than really having any forward looking on that. So the sheriff, I believe this is an ask of 10 vehicles, which is more than the budget committee in the past years has allowed him to buy. So in my opinion, the sheriff is trying to play catch up. So he's not going to need 10 on all of the out years, but he's going to need a substantial amount up front to get that vehicle replacement schedule built. So then that'll kind of norm out in the out years as that CIP is developed. But he's kind of, and again, I'm speaking for him, but if I was in his shoes, I would say he's at the mercy of the budget committee year to year to year to year. So I think that'll change in the out years. But as of right now, this is a heavy lift on this number, this 813, to start the development of his vehicle replacement schedule and the development of the county's CIP.
How many vehicles do they have total in the department? Hazard, I guess.
A lot. And I don't say that in a negative light. They've got search and rescue, and they've got the jail, and they've got civil, and they've got animal control. So, when I was the chief, I had patrol cars, admin, and detective cars. The sheriff has a lot. I mean, they've got snowmobiles, and four-wheelers, boats. I didn't have to manage that.
Yeah. Just wondering what percentage of their fleet this 10 vehicles represents. So
I believe, and you'll have to ask the sheriff, I believe these are patrol cars.
thank you.
Sorry, that was kind of a long answer, but
Vicki, the $55,000 being transferred in for emergency management, do you know what the source of those funds are and what they're for? You mentioned
There's
55,000.
6,000 being transferred in.
How much?
6,000.
6,000 for
They
emergency management?
have 55,000
They
set
have
aside because
55,000.
they've been putting 6,000
A year.
a year.
Okay, so they're transferring an
plan
additional
for
6.
Vehicle replacement, yeah.
Thank you.
Was the goal or original intent of transferring in the $812,000 from the LATCF grant, I hope I'm saying that correctly, intended for the sheriff's office equipment needs, or was it more general?
you want me to speak to that? That was kind of my desire.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't like paying for things that are not sustainable. And here's an example. I don't believe in getting a grant to hire people, because when the grant runs out, what are you going to do? Fire your people? So I just philosophically do not support taking one-time dollars to pay for something that you must sustain as a business, and in this case, the county. In the past, we were using road funds that are not sustainable to provide a service to the county, and I didn't think that was appropriate. So now that we've kind of philosophically decided we're not gonna use road funds to support the sheriff's office, what I said in the workshops was, if we've got one-time dollars, let's invest in assets that we don't have to buy. So we could say we're not gonna buy cars this year. Or we could if we thought we had the money. But we're not trying to pay for people and families on income that's not sustainable. Because I don't agree with that. Not gonna fire people, but I can go without buying a car. So the LATCF funds, which are not sustainable funds, they're one-time dollars. There was a decision made to use those types of funds to pay for assets that we may or may not buy, but not people. I didn't mean to get animated, but I get passionate about that because I don't want to fire county employees. We need to be taking care of our employees. And then if we don't buy a car, we don't buy a car. That's not gonna hurt. Anyway, so that's the point.
Thank you. I like
Sorry.
animation.
I just gotta protect staff.
Are there any other questions about the equipment reserve and what it's used for and who uses it or anything? Okay. I just have a whole list here, don't I? Okay, county schools, this is basically a pass-through fund for secure rural schools, State Board of Forestry, small rail car and taxes, electric co-op. Revenues come in, we share it with the school districts. We get a percentage of money to give to the county districts and the city districts, and we split it that way. And it's basically just an in and out. Great, okay. The next one is the Finance Tourism Competitive Grant Program. This is a program the county has set up that is funded through transient room tax. A certain percentage of transient room tax is given to support the grant program. There are no other revenues that are received. There's a pretty hefty beginning fund balance that's been carried over, and the commissioners have given us the go-ahead to change our grant program from $100,000 each cycle. We do a spring and a fall cycle, both. And so we've increased it from $100,000 to $150,000 this spring. We are also planning on increasing it to $150,000 in the fall to try to, get the money out there, and it's not doing any good sitting in a beginning fund balance. So that's the goal. The $8,000 in interdepartmental administrative charges actually go to the finance department because the finance department runs this program or administers the program. We have a committee that meets with all the applicants that apply for the tourism grants, and then they decide who they want to recommend to the Board of County Commissioners, and then the Board of County Commissioners approves or changes or declines whatever their list is. And that happens twice a year.
Question? I see that the anticipated amount next year from TRT is $311,850.
Yes.
I want to try to be as nice as possible. If all of our hoteliers actually paid their bill, what would this number be?
That would be a question for Rick Bond.
Okay.
We'll be here later
Okay.
to present tourism.
Okay.
This or transit room tax. This figure is directly, they have a transfer out of their tourism or their transit room tax into tourism.
Okay.
So I use the number they give me for the revenue into this program. And I'm not sure what the collection rate is.
Commissioner DeGroot, do you have any idea what that number might look like if that one hotel would pay their bill?
I'm sorry, I don't have the number
Oh, I do
on the
have
top
an
of my
idea on
head.
that. Okay, now that you say it that way. I think it would probably be close to $100,000.
Okay, thank you.
But you can verify that with Mr. Vaughn.
Is that non-current to date or
Yes.
annually?
These are annual numbers.
But the past due amount,
We have one hotelier that is chronically.
2
past due.
quarters behind.
so 2 quarters behind is $100,000.
I'd say that would be about 50.
Or 50.
That's about it. Well, the fourth quarter was 67,000, if I remember right, and then now we're going into quarter 1 of the next year.
The total amount in arrears would be 100.
Including penalties, yes.
Okay.
Getting close anyway.
Okay.
Saying that would be great to get back in the hands of citizens if people would actually hotel to pay their bill.
Okay. Okay to move on to economic development?
Yep.
Okay, economic development is also a we administer this fund in finance. It's funded with video poker lottery proceeds and has pretty strict rules around what you can spend video lottery dollars on. It has to be economic development. We have one grant program that's operated out of this fund a year. It's done in the fall. And we spend between $50,000 and $100,000 on that grant program. This fall, we're anticipating $100,000 because we do have a little bit extra in beginning fund balance in the economic development fund as well. We also have a pretty hefty contract services line item for $477,500. The contracts that we have for economic development, the first one we have is with Klamath County Economic Development Association, CASETA, for $300,000. That contract that we have with them is currently extended through 2025. Like I said, the grant program, I budgeted $100,000 in contract services for that for the fall. We also have a contract with South Central Oregon Economic Development District, or SCOED, for $50,000. That's part of the 477. Klamath IDEA for $15,000. Catalyze Klamath for $5,000. The Badger Venture at KCC for $2,500, and Klamath Promise for $5,000. So all those add up to the contracted amount of $477,500. The interdepartmental admin charge of $4,000 also goes to finance, so that and the $8,000 is the typical $12,000 that we have coming in to help with administrative costs for these two programs.
Do you have any questions or discussions? Moving on to Taylor Grazing.
Oh, geez.
Commissioner Menti, would you like to present Taylor Grazing?
Lord knows I have an issue.
Was it
Taylor Grazing is an old act. It's a federal act that says that the federal government will send money to Klamath County to distribute to the BLM in Lakeview and the BLM in Prineville for Taylor Grazing. That's it. We get it in, we send it out. It's been an act since 1930 something.
Yeah.
Moving on to Title III.
Quick question on that, and maybe we'll save this conversation for another day, but just maybe a point of clarification to the commissioners that have done this longer than I. Would that take a legislative fix for the state to actually just pay BLM, not us?
state? No, that'd be a congressional.
A congressional fix, okay, thank you.
Okay,
It's ridiculous.
so Title III is very exciting going forward. We
Heck
are
yeah.
now accepting Title III funds again. We haven't had Title III funds come into the county since, I believe, 2009.
13.
We have received.
That's when we last had elections.
I know, but I think we elected 0.
I
I believe the last time we had funding was 2009. So
It's going back a few days.
the Board of County Commissioners has elected to receive 7% of our SRS or Title I, 2, and 3 split. Has been changed. So we will start receiving money in here. What's in these funds right now is we had original legislation that started in 2000, and we received money back in between 2000 and 2006 or 7 under federal forest and ONC original legislation, and then we received money in after 2007, 2008, 2009, and we call that the Title III Federal Forest ONC new money. And so there's 4 funds. There's Federal Forest Original and New, and ONC Old Original and New. We have about $1 million that has been obligated but unspent. That's what's sitting in these funds right now. We anticipate between $250,000 and $300,000 to be received each year going forward when we receive our SRS funding. And the Board of County Commissioners has created a committee that's comprised of a fire chief, an emergency management employee, a search and rescue professional, and 2 at-large members of the county or the community to bring recommendations to the board for spending of Title III funds and what to do with the Title III funds, how to get the money out in the community where it can be used and made the most of. So that going forward is pretty exciting to either, and they're deciding whether they want to reobligate this $1 million, whether or not they would like to talk to the people that still have the obligation to see if they're even still working on any projects that have to do with this. So we're hoping to get this money out the door as fast as we can.
Perfect.
Do you have any questions or discussion comments?
I don't either.
Well, thank you so much, Vicki. I believe that brings us, we're ahead of schedule.
10 minutes.
So that would bring us to lunch. So before recessing, do we want to still come back at 1 o'clock then?
I think so.
Great.
Got a couple of
So we'll recess the budget hearing for Klamath County until 1 o'clock.
Boom.